Chapter 18. Honolulu. Who hath desired the sea, the sight of salt water unbounded, the heave and the halt, and the hurl and the crash of the comber wind-hounded? Kipling. Oahu must be built on shaky foundations, was Bert's first thought when he got his feet on solid ground. The whole island is rolling and pitching like a ship. He laughed at the absurd notion. It was good to be ashore, even if he was still wearing his sea legs. On the opposite side of the pier, at which the Queen of Asia lay, was a fleet of blue and white fishing sampans. A few steps farther on, Bert felt an urgent need to hold his nose to shut out the pungent odor of the huge fish, vegetable, and fruit market on his left. Instantly, he lost his taste for fish. Up King Street he walked, past innumerable Chinese and Japanese shops of every description, shops that reminded him strongly of the side street shops in San Francisco's Chinatown. In his interest in watching the many strange people who moved leisurely about the streets, Bert almost forgot his own errand. In this district, they were mostly Chinese, wearing their pajama-like native costume, and Japanese, the men with bare legs and straw sandals. Then the Oriental district gave way suddenly to the American business section. At Bishop Street, Bert inquired his way and was directed a few doors to his left to the Commercial Pacific Cable Office. In the same instant that he discovered the office, he sighted two familiar figures just emerging from the door. They were coming toward him. Quickly, the boy stepped into the doorway of a shop and waited while the second mate of the Queen of Asia walked by, deep in low-voiced conversation with the ship's doctor. When they had passed, Bert entered the office. Methodically, scarcely aware of what he was doing, Bert copied Bill Billings' message onto a cablegram blank and pushed it across the counter to a clerk. What business had Dr. Hyes and Poker Gust in the cable office? What messages had they sent or received? On a desk back of the counter lay a penciled message. The pencil meant that it was outgoing. Was that the message that the two men had sent? The clerk finished checking Bill's message. Bert paid for it and turned to go. The clerk stopped him. "Are you from the Queen of Asia?" he asked. "Knew you must be. I have a couple of messages for Albert Lindsay aboard your ship. Know him?" "I am Albert Lindsay," the boy answered. "The message I sent was for a friend." The clerk looked at him closely. "All right," he said. "Sign here, and here." Bert tore open the messages. The first was signed Dad. He stared in astonishment, then grinned sheepishly at his own stupidity. Of course, his father would know that he was here, would know the exact hour of the bark's arrival, unless Sparks had lain down on the job. And even the president of the company was observing the rule that the ship's wireless was to be used for official business only. The message read, "All anxious about you. Shall I cable steamer fare home? Home. Home. With good food, hot baths, comfort and security instead of cold hardships and danger." For a moment, there was a wistful, faraway look in the boy's eyes. Then he laughed softly. Dear old Dad. That message should have been signed Mother. For, of course, it was she who had suggested his coming home. His dad knew he wasn't a quitter, but a mother wouldn't think of it in that way. Bert wrote an answer immediately. Then he looked at the second message. It was from Hargrave, and read, "Use eyes and ears. Speed essential. Cable any developments." Over this message, the boy puzzled for some time, finally tucking it into a pocket and returning to the street without sending an answer. He walked down Bishop Street to the waterfront, then turned to his left and followed Ala Moana along the shore for an hour, so busy with his own thoughts that he was only halfway conscious of the luxuriant flowering shrubs along the way and only dimly aware of where he was going. Hargrave's repeated injunction to use his eyes and ears. Did Hargrave think he would forget? And was there some new reason why speed was essential? He knew as well as Hargrave that the fishing season on the Nushagak River was only a month long, and that before it started there was a vast amount of work to be done at the cannery. Fishing boats, tugs, and lighters launched and put in commission, a pier built, fish conveyors, and new canning machinery installed and got in working order. He knew, too, that nearly all of the necessary material was in the hold and on the deck of the Queen of Asia. Without it, the machinists and carpenters who were going north on the steamer Alatak would be helpless. They would have to wait in idleness until the bark arrived, and then it would take 2 more weeks of hard labor to lighter the bark's cargo ashore. Certainly speed was essential, but hadn't they allowed the sailing vessel the usual margin of time? Bert suddenly realized that his legs were tired. Pacing back and forth in a small space on a heaving deck was poor training for a steady hike of even an hour. He might squat down on his heels to rest, like the Japs, who waited on street corners for trolley cars. But a glance ahead gave him another idea. He had been walking steadily toward Diamond Head, so he must have been walking toward Waikiki also. Waikiki, a swim. A few more minutes of brisk walking brought him to the new Royal Hawaiian Hotel, which he had seen from the bark, and then to the Moana Hotel. At the bathhouse adjoining the Moana, he rented a suit and was soon racing down the beach, forgetful of everything save the joy of plunging into the towering breakers. Again and again, he dived into a great wall of clear blue-green water as a foaming crest reared over his head and came up puffing and blowing to watch the breaker crash on the beach behind him. In the exhilaration of the sport, he was not even envious of the bronzed figures that came rushing shoreward on surfboards, but he did remember, almost with regret, that this was but a temporary respite from the biting cold of the North Pacific. His body still glowing from the exercise and the brisk rub following his swim, Bert climbed aboard an open trolley car and fell to considering Hargrave's cablegram again. The problem did not seem so difficult now. Cable any developments. There wasn't much to tell in the way of actual developments, but he would have to be careful how he told even what little there was in a message which many eyes would see before it reached its destination. Mutiny threatens in China, gang. He couldn't send that. Would Hargrave get the idea if he said, "General trouble threatens"? He scribbled the words on the back of Hargrave's cablegram, and he couldn't say, "Pockmarked man in crew." But that was easy. "Model giver in crew," he wrote. What about the doctor and the second mate? Nothing definite to tell yet. But that town address. His pencil moved through the words. Investigate address 14 Spofford Alley. Bert read over his 3 cryptic sentences and then added with a chuckle, "Sight and hearing good." Back in the cable office, Bert copied his message and waited while the clerk counted the words. Did the man's eyebrows lift slightly as his pencil checked over investigate address 14 Spofford Alley? Bert couldn't be sure. But when he had paid for the cable, he loitered in the office and watched out of the corner of his eye while the clerk compared the message he had just written with the one already on his file. So that address occurred in another message. Well, that made it all the more worth Hargrave's investigating. If only he could find out what was in that other outgoing cablegram. But there was no way. The cable clerk might be curious, but he wouldn't talk. A man who talked wouldn't be holding down his job. The cablegram to Hargrave off his mind, Bert thought about other things, chiefly food. He was hungry, and his watch told him that it was supper time aboard the bark, but somehow the thought of Joe Bloom's cooking was slightly nauseating. There would be fresh meat tonight, possibly fresh vegetables, and for dessert, tapioca pudding or pie. A week before, he had considered the fresh pork, fried potatoes, and canned vegetables from Joe Bloom's galley a feast for kings. But now he shuddered. He was hungry, no question about that, but he couldn't think of anything that he wanted to eat. Strange. Presently, his glance lighted by accident on a fruit stand, and he knew the answer. Fruit. He was hungry for fruit as he had never been hungry for anything before. From the little Japanese who ran the stand, he bought luscious ripe bananas, oranges, juicy mangoes, and a coconut. Then, his arms full of packages, he tramped down to the waterfront. He made his way out to the end of the huge pier at the foot of Fort Street and sat down with his legs dangling over the water, there under the shadow of lofty Aloha Tower, and in plain sight of the Queen of Asia, a quarter-mile away. He opened his bags of fruit and began to eat. He ate happily, immoderately, wondering vaguely if he would ever be able to eat enough to satisfy his craving. At the end of half an hour, he knew that he had already eaten too much, Ruefully, he surveyed the amazing pile of orange, banana, and mango peels and mango pits and coconut shell by his side before he stuffed them into a bag to be disposed of later. For another half hour, the boy sat gazing around the harbor. Every roving glance either began or ended with the Queen of Asia. The sunset, and in the quirky gathering darkness, the tall bark seemed to have acquired a new fascination for him. When he had looked his fill, he gathered up his remaining bags of fruit and walked slowly back to the bark, up the gangplank, now guarded by a fellow seaman, and down to the deck. It was like coming home after a long absence. He was surprised to find what a hold the bark had taken on him in the short time that he had been one of her crew. He could see now why sailors developed sentimental loves and hates for their vessels. The bark was not a man-made thing, but a creature with a soul, petulant, willful, moody, but responsive to love and understanding. No wonder old sea captains bowed their heads and wept shamelessly at the passing, in storm or in junkyard, of the ships they once commanded. Out of his nearly forgotten childhood memories, there flashed across Bert's mind a conversation between his father and Hargrave. It was just after Hargrave, then Captain Hargrave, had given up the command of the Queen of the West to go into the office of the Nushagak Salmon Company. "A ship is the best friend a man can have," Hargrave had said. "A man or a woman friend may betray you, but a ship will be true till death. A ship that you love will fight for you to the last atom of her endurance. Not many human friends will do that." Bert had stood by his father's knee and wondered what Hargrave meant. He knew now, and the memory of Hargrave's words gave him at once a better understanding of Hargrave and of his own newly discovered feeling for the Queen of Asia. "Ah, el presidentito, que tiene." Jolted abruptly out of his reverie, Bert faced present realities again in the shape of the leering Mexican who had bumped against him in the gathering darkness. He shouldn't have loitered here on the deck with his arms full of packages. Summoning his scanty knowledge of Spanish, he answered the man, "Tengo nada para usted," and then walked quickly aft. The little president. Bert wondered how many of the China gang knew him by that title, and where they had got their information. Of course, Pete Condon knew, and Dopey J. They might have told others. But wasn't there another way? Supposing the captain had told the mates, then might not Poker Gust have told the doctor, or told members of the China gang directly? In the lazarette, Bert divided the fruit among Old Smith, Fred von Bergen, and 3 or 4 others, being careful, however, to save out one piece of each fruit for Bill Billings and Big Boy Johnson.